important it is to be grateful to retain your jobs in this environment. It's a full-time job to manage stress on a difficult job, not because it stretches you outside of your comfort zone, rather a clash with a manager or a cultural clash, leaving you very anxious about what to do about changing roles at a time like this. Fortunately, Robert Amos, head of executive compensation at Jardine Matheson, is here to tell us about how to maintain that positivity, daily mindfulness, and evaluating your career path and finding out where you really want to go in the future. Robert is currently speaking out of the UK. Good morning, Robert. Thank you so much for joining us so early in your morning. I'll turn it over to you.
Hi there. Can people hear me?
Yes, we can.
Perfect. I think I just got kicked out there. So thank you for bringing me into this conversation. So just to start the discussion here, I want to spend a little bit of time talking about the current situation. If we were to look to any of the newspapers, any of the media coverage that we see right now, things are pretty grim outside. They're painting a particularly unfortunate picture about Hong Kong's unemployment market being at around 6%, the highest in 15 years. Indicators point towards a very long and slow economic recovery in Hong Kong. And if we look at some of the kind of more structural changes, other cities in Asia are starting to jostle for Hong Kong's place as a premier financial center and as a core aviation hub. That doesn't paint the most optimistic of images for the employment market right now. And that can lead to a pretty depressing view on how things are right now. I guess that is true to an extent. We've seen some dreadful results of the current pandemic on airlines not being able to operate. In turn, that means that hotels aren't receiving international guests. And more recently, our bars and restaurants are seeing a significant drop in their patrons. So from that particular angle, it's completely understandable why people might be finding things difficult right now, whether they're looking for a new opportunity or whether they are looking to retrain or to move into something new. But things aren't necessarily entirely as depressing as that might allude to. Touching on a few of the points that Levine had mentioned, and even Rob in his first presentation earlier today, there are certain sectors and certain industries that are actually seeing a boom. They're actually growing significantly right now, which presents a wealth of opportunities. Let's take the IT sector, as Levine had alluded to earlier as well. The sudden growth in home working that we see right now has led to changes in the types of skills that are required within organizations to support that. So the kind of historic focus on the armies of technicians that support networks and desktops within an office are potentially going to become slightly less important, even though at the moment they reflect maybe 50% of a corporate IT workforce. And that might be shifting in favor of newly created or even more in-demand skills, things like cybersecurity, things like cloud computing, where there's already been chronic undersupply in the market, and it creates even more demand for these particular skills. So looking at it from that angle, there are still a number of opportunities that are going to present themselves either through lack of availability, scarce skills, or just emergence as organizations and society adapt to how we're going to be working in the future, moving out of the pandemic at some point in time. Now, why am I using this positioning when it comes to talking about potential jobs that you're in right now, what might be working or not working, or indeed if you're out of work at the moment and looking for a new opportunity? There are maybe three categories that I would put people into right now. Either you're not in a job right now and are looking for an opportunity and not sure how to start. You're in a job right now, but you're really not liking it and you're desperate to get out or find something new. Or you're in a position right now, but you're concerned about the future. You want to develop yourself. You want to protect yourself for whatever may come along. Now, all three of these circumstances are very different, of course, but there are many similarities in the ways in which you can act on these issues and build on these issues. And if you're in the first couple of categories, if you're in the second two categories, these issues are just as important to deal with, whether you're, as it would be if you're not in a role at the moment. Why do I say that? Things like being in a role that you're not particularly enjoying, you're hating it. The impact that can have on your mental health, your well-being, the impact that can have on your performance. These things can be particularly long-lasting and damaging if you don't take steps to address that and to identify ways in which that you can emerge from your current state right now. Now, let's take the performance example. If you're in a role right now and you're really not enjoying it and you're looking for new opportunities, but inertia gets in the way, then that can have an impact on the way in which you'll be delivering your work on a day-to-day basis. It could damage your potential relationships, but it could also impact you on the way in which you perform in interviews in the future as well. If you're becoming less confident in yourself or your own abilities, then of course, being able to act on that and identify ways in which you could tackle these things would be helpful to help you move forward. Now, when it comes to addressing each of these 3 points, whether you're in a role and you're wanting to move, in a role you want to protect your own skills, or indeed you're out of work, unfortunately, and you're looking to rejoin the employment market, it's important to make sure you make the right kind of move and you're looking for the right kind of things at the moment. And the way in which you can do that is to reflect on maybe 4 different areas of the work that you've either had recently or positions you've been looking at in future, and identify what is and what doesn't work for you. Now let's start with the negatives. If we're looking at what doesn't work for you, perhaps it could be things to do with the culture. If you were previously in an organization with a very commercial environment, too much focus on sales rather than doing the job itself, for some people that works, for some people it doesn't. If you're hardwired or your brain is engineered in such a way you're interested in the intricacies of a task rather than being out and selling, then it gives you an indicator as to the kind of roles you should or should not be looking at. Perhaps it might be the colleagues. It could be the relationships you have with the immediate team that you work with, or with your direct line manager. That'll give you a flavor for what is and what hasn't worked for you in the past. When it comes to performance, this might be because you're not necessarily properly trained. There could be areas of the work which are developing that you don't feel comfortable within, or you're just struggling at the same time as well. And finally, passion is the simplest but often the most difficult to deal with. You just don't like the role. That might be because it's mundane and you've been doing the same thing for a long time, or your interest is starting to emerge in a different field or to emerge elsewhere. By focusing on one of these 4 lenses or any of the 4 lenses, it helps you to create a picture of what kind of environments are going to be less suitable for you, one end of the spectrum, and allows you to move to the other end of the spectrum, identifying either organization types of roles, environments that are going to better align with your own individual skills. Of course, the focus here is ensuring that you're going to be operating at your best in whichever role you move into. So being able to focus on these things will be really, really important to identify what could be next. Now, the key piece that's come up a couple of times in the sessions so far is identifying the right skills or the next opportunity for you. Let's move on to the next. So once you've identified what does work for you, and indeed what doesn't work, then you can focus your attention to opportunities that could be potentially using the transferable skills that you've evidenced using that spectrum we just discussed. So let's say you come from a role in aviation where demand in that particular sector has rapidly declined, unfortunately. Targeting roles in the same sector is not necessarily going to give you too many returns right now. The return to full capacity in aviation is very difficult to predict. But the skills that someone may have from that particular sector are going to be completely transferable into a range of different roles. I'll come to a few real-life examples in just a few minutes. But focusing on how the skills that you've developed and proven in previous roles can be applicable to new opportunities in which you're going to be thriving. If you're looking to move into roles where your skills are applicable, but perhaps you don't necessarily have the technical expertise, that's where retraining courses can be helpful. By looking at additional certifications, for example, or ways in which you can evidence your ability to undertake a role, in addition to the transferable skills you have, will help you to stand out when you're applying for these new positions. But what's really important here as well is from a personal perspective, you'll have better clarity on the environments and the kinds of roles and positions that do and don't work for you, and how to avoid the ones that don't work, and really how to target the ones that do work for you at the same time as well. Why am I saying target and focusing on these areas? In the particularly competitive employment market we have right now, sending out 100 applications generically is not likely to yield too many results and can be quite impactful, hurtful, if you're not seeing any progress there. Whereas focusing on a handful of much more tailored applications or much more tailored opportunities can be much more helpful and potentially yield much better results. But a key thing to focus on will be future-proofing yourself. This is something that Levine was mentioning earlier in his presentation, but ensuring that the skills that you're going to be positioning yourself with, or indeed the skills that you are learning and developing, are going to be ready for the future on roles that may come up in future, as opposed to what's available right now. Going back to the example about cybersecurity, cloud computing, and all of these very IT-specific examples, employers have to be a little bit more flexible with who they're going to be taking on because the supply in the market is already scarce. So if we have individuals that have the right kind of core ingredients, the transferable skills that I've mentioned, but are evidencing their commitment to grow in certain kind of roles that are in high demand with few talents available, then it's more likely that an individual is going to make progress in applications for these roles because they're showing their commitment to learn. And that's something which is super important. From a practical point of view, there are opportunities within Hong Kong for individuals to act on these retraining courses and to gain support if additional costs would be incurred to take these courses. So for example, in Hong Kong, we have the Employment Retraining Board, which offers subsidies and supports for either core, soft and technical skills training and is available to a large group of people within Hong Kong. As an example as well, if an individual happens to be earning less than $12,000 a month or has zero income because of a recent job loss, then there are opportunities for these courses to be fully funded via fee waivers as well. So there really are opportunities available there to focus on retraining and gaining the core technical skills alongside transferable skills that one might be able to bring in as well. Now, there are a lot of YouTube videos, there's a lot of content around at the moment which talks about similar things to what I'm saying right now. But is it real or is it hypothetical nonsense? Can I really move into a new role where I haven't necessarily got proven experience and I'm only going to be focusing on my transferable skills? But if we look elsewhere in the world, there's evidence to say yes, absolutely realistic. And the best example that I would give is if we look to Sweden. So Scandinavian Airlines, one of the preeminent brands of Sweden, like many airlines in the world, was required to lay off around 90% of their flight crew earlier this year, a significant reduction in their operational crew. Now, what does that mean? Are these individuals able to find new roles within other airlines? Arguably not. Would there be opportunities elsewhere? Arguably yes. So what did Scandinavian Airlines do? They partnered with the Swedish government to quickly reskill employees to take up healthcare and support care roles on the basis of the transferable skills they would have from being flight attendants, for example. A lot of the requirements around care, service, around helping other people were equally transferable into a healthcare environment, but there would be some technical skills training required as well. This is very similar to the example of the Employment Retraining Board that I mentioned earlier, where these courses exist and can help individuals make that transition from one technical role to a next using the transferable skills that they do have. And that's only one example. Within Sweden, the hospitality industry also started an industry-wide reskilling program that meant individuals in the F&B side of things could also move into care work, looking after the elderly and those that were in additional need of support because of the transferable skills, with a small skill training course to help plug the gap of technical skills there as well. Why? The idea of hospitality and helping other people, the core skills are equally transferable into that sector. But why did this actually happen? Demand for the roles that we're talking about really surged, and there was a stark lack of supply. So what did it mean? Employers, whether we're looking at healthcare, whether we're looking at support workers, or a range of other sectors, had to really focus on getting people that had the right core ingredients to take on future roles, as opposed to looking at the proven experience, often years of experience, in the role itself. If there just aren't enough people with the with proven experience in healthcare or in care for the elderly, then employers have to look a bit more broadly. So going back to the point I made earlier about things looking particularly grim on the outside, The inverse is also true. Organizations have to be as flexible as those looking for new roles or individuals that are looking to transfer or change roles as well. So it creates a much more interesting environment right now where individuals can look at new opportunities and evidence their capabilities based on flexible skills as opposed to proven experience in one particular field. So in Hong Kong, if we're looking at new opportunities, what are my options? Which sectors are actually rapidly hiring and why? Within the public sector and NGOs, so non-governmental organizations, there has been a significant capital injection to create roles, and that's through the Anti-Epidemic Fund, which was announced earlier this year. Over the next 2 years, there are around 30,000 time-limited positions being created. Time-limited, normally contracts of 1 or 2 years, and they're targeting people that might not necessarily have proven skills in the technical roles that are being hired in the public sector. There are certain roles that are reserved for graduates, and there is additional support available for minorities. But the purpose of the jobs created through the Anti-Epidemic Fund is to really reinforce the points that I've just made earlier, that the 30,000 roles that are being created are targeting people to move into new roles based on their skills, because the roles they were in previously may not exist, may have changed fundamentally, or may not exist for a period of time as the virus continues to take hold. Within healthcare, obviously booming, but it's not just caregiving roles that are going to be important as well. If we look at the surge in demand for testing, also public engagement and communication, being able to reach out to the population of Hong Kong for reasons like public health communications. If you're coming from an internal communications or an investor relations kind of role, for example, those skills will be equally transferable into health communications in the same way that people working in data sciences could potentially move into informatics roles as well. And then finally, within logistics, the obvious piece is that demand for getting goods moved around has continued to increase as people move to online shopping and online delivery. But customer support and technology roles are going to be equally important. One of the reasons why Amazon as a business has performed particularly well versus some of the other peers is because it's already set up to service customers from a remote working point of view, and has actually been one of the organizations that have been hiring at its fastest ever rate. So in summary, there is no shortage of opportunities in Hong Kong, although the media coverage may suggest otherwise. Organizations are continuing to hire, but it's hiring for new positions, new types of skills that are required, and new roles that may not have existed previously. What's going to be really important as people look to either re-enter the employment market, or to change roles from their current position, or to solidify themselves in their current role, is to focus on the environments in which they're going to be operating their best, really focusing on the kind of culture, the kind of positions, and the things that will make them perform well, and then to be identifying what skills gap they have and looking at opportunities to retrain, but then also using their proven skills and transferable skills to position themselves as the best person.
Thank you so much, Rob. I thought that was really interesting in how you sort of raised awareness on the Employment Retraining Board here in Hong Kong, which, you know, is an awareness for us in terms of subsidizing education and trying to future-proof our skills. We do have one question before we bid you farewell, and that is, how do clients actually view qualifications from Coursera or the likes of EDX? Are these really true qualifications and the repute that it would have on our resumes to help us move from point A to point B in our careers?
Sure. So I think qualifications like that, or certifications, whatever language you want to use to describe these, what they really help to do is evidence an individual's commitment to learning. So going back to the point about transferable skills, one can bring the experience and knowledge they would have gained in previous roles to help them settle in. But if someone is taking the kind of courses that you've mentioned to help grow their technical skills, or to evidence their commitment to really want to position themselves in a new role, that's where the real value is held. They do have a certain, there's a difference between the courses you've mentioned there and an academic qualification. In many cases, one might be a certification that is required to undertake a role in future. But the real purpose these certifications that you just mentioned serve is to show and evidence one's commitment to learning, and also ability to adapt as well. So they certainly have value.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for that, for sharing your insights. We really appreciate you joining us at LSF and filling us in on today's segment in terms of future proofing and believing that there are jobs out there and there are subsidies available. So thank you for that.
Thank you for having me.
All right, then take care.